Right, folks, welcome to another episode of Common Sense Podcast. Folks, if it's your first time, thank you for joining us. Thank you for being a part of this. Thank you for giving this video a chance. Do subscribe. And if you're listening on, I believe it's Apple Podcast or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, then hit the subscribe button. Join what's going to be a really interesting series, I think, of really interesting conversations. I'm pumped about today because we've got a really interesting guest on. I've said interesting like 4 times already, but I mean it. It's full of interest because what we want to talk about today, I guess, is the state of British politics. What's next? You know, we are literally weeks away from freedom, as it were. Lockdown is set to be lifted, as you know, on the 21st, or at least all restrictions are said to be disappearing. Of course, there is now this Indian variant, which people are concerned about. Whether that's going to change things, I don't know yet. I'm hoping it doesn't. But before we even get to lockdown, what's going on? I want to bring my guest on because I think even on lockdown, he's going to have interesting perspectives. You've seen him online. You've seen him on TV. You've seen him seemingly everywhere during this lockdown, keeping us entertained, I guess, but also probing us, helping us think. And I guess that's what I want to do in this podcast. I want to think hard. And so I've got a really interesting guest. I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while, actually. And so, at risk of getting introductions wrong, which I often do, I'm not going to get it wrong this time because I'm going to tell you exactly what he does. We got today Calvin Robinson, who's a political advisor. He's a broadcaster. He's a commentator. I did overhear him saying he can hold a tune as well. But I don't know if he wants me to share that. Calvin, how are you doing?
Hello, Mike. How are you doing?
Good. Better now that you are here. Is that true? Can you hold a tune?
I do sing in church, yes.
Okay. Were you a choir boy, or this is just something you do in congregation? What's up with that?
I went to Sylvia Young's at one point. Singing is a passion of mine, but it's something that I only do in church these days when asked to. So yeah.
So we have to come to your church essentially.
Yes, please
do. That's one way to evangelize. Okay, cool. Well, I spoke there before we get into you and what you do, and I think it's going to be really interesting for people to hear us talk about some issues. But just let's talk about lockdown first, because you can look at me. I do not have a haircut. I look like I don't want to say what I look like. I can't wait for things to be lifted, to be back, if you like.
Mike, you have no hair. What are you talking about?
Hey, we just met. Hey, but what are your thoughts on lockdown? What are your thoughts on how things have been going so far? The 21st of June being the date where we're all going to be free. What's your thinking around lockdown?
Let me just dig myself out that hole. First of all, what I meant is your hair is so short it cannot be nothing. It's very, very neat. What I think's next coming out of lockdown, freedom. I hope that we never ever see our freedoms curtailed in this way again by any government. So we need some legislation put in place that prevents our civil liberties being stripped away from us, even under emergency situations like this. Because what starts under an emergency gets extended, as we've seen. What started out 3 weeks to flatten the curve has ended up over a year now of lockdowns on and off and tiers on and off. Essentially, we haven't been free since early 2020. And it's not okay under any regulations. So we need to make sure that this never, ever happens again.
And I'm guessing your belief is what about whether we should have had a lockdown in the first place? Because we've been having these conversations now as we reach the end. People kind of reflecting and going, how did Boris Johnson handle things? Of course, we're hearing of a COVID inquiry that may start, who knows, soonish. What are your thoughts on how the government has handled COVID, especially those early days where Boris Johnson was saying, it's just a little bit, nothing?
Well, it's troublesome. So initially, I gave the government the benefit of the doubt. I thought, we've never been in a situation like this before, not in living memory at least, and it's very difficult to navigate. Perhaps a lockdown might work. even under that situation, I thought, we should have done it 2 weeks earlier than we did. And we should have absolutely locked down our borders, closed our borders completely back in February, if not March 2020. For it to take months and months and months for that to happen doesn't make any sense. But the fact that we did lock down is worrying because it's something that hadn't been tried before. Italy did it. That's it in the Western world. That's the only country that did it. And they copied the CCP. They copied a communist regime, a dictatorship in China. So it's not necessarily going to have the same impact because they have very different methodologies out there. But also it's not a pattern we want to start. We don't want to set precedent of following China on these issues regarding liberties. So it was worrying that they did it in the first place. And then when they did do it, they did it too late. And then it didn't have the desired effect. So they repeated it over and over and over. They doubled down. When you're wrong, I used to be a school teacher. I used to tell my kids, when you're wrong, own up to it, admit it, and then you can move on and become better. But politicians don't like to admit when they're wrong because it makes them look human. And rather than apologize and move forward, they double down. And we've continued to have this. And I think the independent inquiry will show that lockdown was a mistake because we never did get that cost benefit analysis. They never did do the research into how badly it would cripple our economy and how many lives will be lost as a consequence of lockdown. We're talking about, people who haven't received cancer treatment, people who haven't received diabetes treatment, people who haven't been diagnosed, never mind receive treatment, and people who can no longer see their general practitioner. None of this is okay. People are suffering, people are dying, people are losing their livelihoods, businesses are going bankrupt, the high street is dead, pubs are closed. There's so many negative consequences, and none of this was taken on board, and they've shoved it all under the rug. So it's all going to come out to play in the independent inquiry, I hope, at least.
Yeah.
But it's just bonkers. And, the government, to be fair to them, they have done some things, right? The vaccine program was tremendous and world-beating, actually, behind Israel, which is absolutely fantastic. They should champion that more, but they shouldn't lie and cover up things and to suggest that lockdowns are working and suggesting that numbers are going down finally due to lockdowns when we've got this massive vaccine program in place. And that's clearly the place that should be deserving credit is ridiculous.
Well, I mean, right now we're talking about over 5 million people on NHS waiting lists. I mean, it's ridiculous, to be quite frank. It is interesting, actually, the idea that, my mum works in the NHS, and so she often talks about and has spoken about how it feels as though, COVID for the past year is the only illness people get. And so we just conveniently forgotten about every other thing that people may be suffering with. And when I was driving and listening to LBC, sometimes I listen to it just to stretch my mind, hear what the ordinary man thinks. And I remember thinking to myself, imagine being someone who's waiting for like a surgery, as it were, and it's just been just passed aside because COVID's been prioritized. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong or right. It was just really interesting for me to hear that. I want to get into lots of topics. And so what I may do is, it may feel sometimes like we're kind of doing a pick and mix, but I think it's important because I find you really interesting, Calvin, for lots of different reasons.
Thank you.
That's all. It's a compliment. I guess it may come across as like, what's he talking about? And what I mean is, maybe we should start with Black conservatism, because it's something I've discussed on the podcast before, right? And for me, it's really, really interesting, the cultural climate, because I've said it before that as a Black person, I know lots of other Black people. I think Black immigrants who come to the country are almost by default culturally conservative. Mm-hmm. But somehow, in terms of their voting pattern and the way they have popular discourse online, they often don't reflect that cultural conservatism. And so I've always found that really interesting, because my mum is uber conservative. But when she speaks about politics, she goes, oh, I'm a Labour supporter, I'm a Labour voter, I believe in Labour. And I've always found it interesting why that disconnect exists. Mm. So when you look at society, you look at the culture, why do you think that disconnect exists, where people may be conservative when the door is shut, but when the door's open, don't feel confident and can't really articulate, how they feel? And particularly Black people here, before we get into other things.
Yeah, I think most people tend to be small c conservative, most adults at least. Believing in family values and the family is at the core of the community, and believing in service and duty to that community, and all of that stuff is fantastic. But the disconnect is in party politics, and people assume that if you are of an ethnic minority status, you have to vote for the Labour Party because they are the party for black people or for ethnic minorities. And that's a very, very clever game that they've played, because of course they're not. In what way do they represent or support people of ethnic minority status? They don't. And it is a power play. And this is why we have such rife identity politics in this country, because as long as you are identifying first and foremost as your skin color, you are going to relate to their party and vote for their party. And that's what they want. They want to control you. So they say, you are black first and foremost, and we will look after the black people. We will unleash their potential, I think the Labour Party said, which is patronizing as hell. But they don't unleash anyone's potential. And of course, parties on the right or the centre right, such as the Conservatives, don't see you as black. They see you as an individual. And they want to help give everyone a hand up rather than a handout. But parties of the left would prefer handouts, because as long as you're reliant on their handouts, you're reliant on them being in power. And it's a self-perpetuating cycle. You must vote for them because they're the party that looks after you. And you become dependent on them. And that's not right. Nobody should be dependent on any political party or any political system, which is fundamentally why the welfare system doesn't work, and which is why capitalism is the least worst option.
Okay, that's interesting to me, because I get your assessment and I agree in part. What I'm curious about is, so you're a conservative, right? If I was to ask you at the most basic level, why are you a conservative? What would you say?
Because this country is so beautiful. There's so many good things in this country that we want to conserve. We want to protect them for the next generation. We want to preserve the past for the future. And that's, to me, what conservatism is all about. Whereas the liberal progressives or the people on the left think that everything here is bad, want to destroy it and rebuild from scratch because they think that now we're good and in the past we're bad, which is a flawed logic, because we are bad, we're all fallen, and we always have been, and we always, well, not always will be. But the point is that yes, there are things that have been done in history that are horrific, but we're still doing horrific things today. And we're no better than our ancestors. And if we start looking down our noses at them and thinking that we are, that's a very dodgy ground to go down. Because
but wouldn't you
people will do the same to us?
Yeah, I was going to say, wouldn't you say there's a more nuanced position perhaps, which is that maybe liberals don't think everything's bad, let's burn it now from scratch, but they believe things are okay. They could be better, especially when you think about minorities. And for that reason, here are all the different ways to make things better. What would you call that position? Because a lot of liberals I know, that's what they would think their cause is how can we make this country better for, small cohorts of the population who may suffer from tyranny of the majority. If someone has that belief, they wouldn't characterize themselves the way you just done.
Because it's based on a false assumption. What tyranny? that's a nonsense to start with.
The tyranny is the interest. So a system is always going to protect the interest of the majority population, right? And you can split it on race, you can split it on sexuality, you can split it on whatever you want to split it on. Isn't that kind of just the way things run? Is that and even if you have fair policies in terms of how they're enacted, will they still not protect the majority of the people who make up that population?
I don't really know. I think we have equality under law in this country. It's fantastic in that way. But when we talk about representing minority views, I actually think the minority is more vocal than the majority in this country. And minority opinions are pushed forward much more than majority opinions. When we talk about mainstream media, when we talk about politics, all of these, what people on my side of the argument would call woke issues, are far more prominent in politics and in the mainstream media than they are in normal everyday life. So I don't think it's a case that majority interests are after any more than anyone else's.
So when you say they're pushed forward more, again, the question would be, well, what's your timeline? Because there was a time where they weren't heard at all. So are you saying they're pushed forward more right now? Or are you saying...
Yeah, I'm talking about right now.
Okay, well, so if you map things and you say for the last 100 years, whose interest, I'm just speaking, trying to put the opposite perspective here, whose interest has been put forward, right? And then you map that, and then you also map and etch for, well, whose interest you're saying seemingly has been put forward more now. Well, if you've got 99 years versus say 4 years, if with that timeline, why is this such an issue then? Because surely this might be a moment, it might be a period, it might be something that perhaps you're meant to pass through, or is your fear that the left, so to speak, will take over? And I mean, because isn't there another response to this? Isn't there another response to this, which is, for instance, last year we went through a cultural moment. Something happened, it exploded around the world, and people are emoting, people are speaking. Isn't this a good time for people who disagree to just kind of watch, listen, learn? Because naturally, things will probably change back in the future anyways. What would you say to that perspective?
No. So to address some of those points, if what's happening now, is it okay because historically it might have been the other way? I don't agree with that premise at all. But even if I did, I think that overcorrection is not appropriate. We don't want to push any viewpoint more than another viewpoint, and that's what's happening. This minority viewpoint is being pushed more than the majority viewpoint, and that's what I call overcorrection, and that's where resentment builds, that's where hostility builds. What I want to see is equality. Equal opportunities is the best approach, so that everyone's viewpoint can be put forward in a representative manner. But whether I'm not afraid of the far left taking over. I don't think the left has any chance of taking over, not democratically anyway, because most people, I believe, are small c conservative. Most people believe that Britain is a great country. The self-flagellating far left who want to tear everything down and start afresh are a vocal minority. So I'm not afraid of them taking over at all. What I'm afraid of, if I'm afraid of anything, is that there's no balance in the conversation anymore, and their viewpoint seems to be the one that is appropriate. When we talk about the BBC, for example, it's entirely biased towards the metropolitan liberal elites. When we see what's happening in Parliament, most of them are stuck in this Westminster bubble. And when we look at mainstream media, Channel 4, Channel 3, doesn't matter, pick up any paper, or most papers, and they're pushing a social justice warrior narrative that doesn't actually align with what most normal people think, I believe.
Okay, I hear you. And again, it's like I agree in part. Here's what's really interesting, though. There's a slight, maybe a small H hero of mine, linguist John McCorster, and he's written extensively and speaks extensively about language. And I've always found language really interesting when we talk politics, especially identity politics, because what seems to happen, and I'm someone who, parts of me, I am dangerously right wing. Parts of me, I'm dangerously left wing. But here's what I find quite interesting. I have left wing friends, I have right wing friends, and I speak to both of them. And I don't think both sides, politically speaking, are using language in the same way. So much so that people seem to be talking past each other. And this is for a number of different reasons. So John McCorster, who I mentioned before, he made a remark, which I guess, a lot of us know intuitively. And that is like, say, take woke, for instance. When most people use the word woke today, it's used to sneer at other people. It's like, oh, woke. That's what we use. That's the predominant use of the term. At some stage, for like 5 minutes, it did mean to be aware of the systems of, say, oppression or injustices, whatever that exists in the world. It meant that for a good 5 minutes, right? And then it just changed. And the same thing's true of white privilege, right? Now it's used as white privilege and but essentially that it was another way of saying tyranny of the majority when you're black in a majority white country where you make up 3% of the population. There are certain systems, accepted behaviors, access to livable wages, all these different things that a cohort of people had historically that some people were systemically deprived from through law. Things changed, so on and so forth. But I just wonder what you think the future is of these kind of discussions and conversations. If one, we're not even using terms in the same way, and two, it seems like there's a concerted effort on both sides, to brand the other side as incompetent, holier than thou, so on and so forth. I asked Chris Williamson this, like, what do you think the future of these kind of identitarian conversations and debates are, especially in the UK? Because it seems like it's not really going anywhere. You just keep hearing the same points from the left and the right, and that's pretty much it.
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to reclaim our language. 100% believe. I'm with you on that. You mentioned the word woke. It used to be used by people who considered themselves, I think, morally superior. So we mocked it and we threw it back at them. And now woke is a derogatory term for someone who kind of has socially progressive, well, hyper progressive views. The same with white privilege. I think it's something that's, I don't think white privilege is a thing. Therefore, I'm happy to mock that term and not allow people to push that term on me as if it is fact. I'm happy to debate it, and I have done plenty of times, but I don't think it's something that I'm willing to accept as a given fact. And likewise, the opposite side of the argument do the same thing. So, all my life, the word racism has meant prejudice or discrimination towards someone based on their ethnicity. Whereas these days, elements of the left use the term racism to mean a power struggle or a power dynamic between black and white people, or as you call it the what is it, the predominant tyranny or the majority tyranny or whatever. These terms I don't agree with. I don't think that's what that means. So I don't think it's one side doing something to the other. I think both sides do this on language, and you're right, we do talk past each other, and we can't really progress until we meet in the middle ground. But in order to do that, we need to stop reinventing the wheel and stop trying to change language in order to win the argument.
Got you. One question for you then on that. When was the last time you changed your mind?
I change my mind all the time. The last time was
give me one. I really want to know. Like, give me the last time, and perhaps to make it doubly hard for you, or to make it even like actually difficult. When was the last time something you heard from a left-wing activist or from a left-wing paper you thought, you know what, they might have a point?
Okay, so the last debate I did on talk radio, I was talking to Christo Fufas, and he's quite left-wing. He has very progressive views on LGBT issues. I'm quite conservative, have quite conservative views on those issues. And we actually disagreed on most stuff, but we found a few things that we changed each other's mind on. I thought, actually, I hadn't seen it from that perspective. And that's out there in the public sphere. It's on my Telegram, it's on my Facebook for people to watch. But yeah, quite often in a debate, there will be elements that I think, actually, I hadn't thought about it like that, or yeah, he might be right on that. And what we do is, if we want to actually have a good faith debate, is acknowledge those changes of heart or changes of mind or different perceptions and kind of move forward with it. It's I'm not.
But what would you say that? What was that? No, the reason I ask you is because, not to say you don't change your mind. We all do. Any serious intellectual would change their mind when presented with new facts or information. But for me, it's so rare to see people almost concede and go, not to kind of mentally say someone's got a good point, because we do that all the time. But I think what you get sometimes, and the reason why, political commentating frustrates so many people, is that you got left-wing folks in left-wing silos talking to left-wing people, kind of cheering each other on as they speak. And you've got right-wing folks and right-wing silos, so on and so forth. And ever so often they'll cross paths. But in that crossing paths, what happens is they've got like 5 minutes on the show to make their point. And for the most part, they're thinking, how do I pitch to the public? How do I pitch to the audience? How do I kind of lay my arguments out? And then just essentially after that's done, retreating back to wherever it is they want to be. And here's the thing I find really interesting, especially about having discourse with people who don't see things eye to eye with you. If folks who earnestly believe something would focus more on how persuasive they are in terms of their argumentation, applying the principle of charity when they're debating. If they did that, then a part of me wonders if they would be more successful in actually convincing more people to adopt their beliefs. Because when I think about and maybe it's just my friends, sorry friends if you're listening, maybe it's just you, I haven't seen anyone change their mind in years. Now, I've seen people concede that, touche, but I don't really see people say, and hence why, Calvin, I'm kind of hungry for it. And so if it's happened publicly with you and the lad you just spoke about, I would love to watch that, But a part of me just wonders, do you ever think, you know what? Or could you see a world where you go, actually, maybe I need to be more woke?
So I see what you're saying. and I don't go when I speak. I don't go out there to persuade anyone. I literally go there to share my views. If people want to hear my views, I'm happy to share them. I'm not out there to tell anyone else they're wrong. These are just my views. I might be wrong, and I always start with every debate with that premise. I'm happy to hear how I'm wrong. Most of the time, people don't want to tell me how or why I'm wrong. They just want to attack me based on my personality or my characteristics, or ad hominem attacks. And that's because we have become so polarized. We are all entrenched, which I think is the point you're trying to make. And we could definitely benefit from more charity and more good faith debates. But that isn't the starting point anymore. I'm often, when I make a point online, people say, oh, well, he writes for the Daily Mail, so it doesn't really matter what he says. Like, I'm dismissed based on an outlet that I publish my opinions in sometimes. So I make a point of, if I'm wrong, owning up to it and saying, actually, well, yeah, you were right there. I was wrong. Thank you for that. Thank you for pointing that out. Or apologizing, or admitting in fault and apologizing are not weaknesses. And I've never believed that. I firmly believe that we should apologize if we are wrong, but not when we're not wrong. And I don't believe in, this is why I'm against cancel culture, this idea that people should apologize because they've offended someone, even if they meant what they said. Like Piers Morgan, for example, got cancelled from his show because he would not apologize. He would not capitulate. I don't agree with that.
Piers Morgan quit.
He did quit, but he got cancelled from his show in that his producer said he had to apologize. He said, well, I won't do it. So if it comes down to an ultimatum of apologize or leave, you choose to leave, sure.
Yeah, but I wouldn't call that being cancelled. And the reason why it's important is because this brings me on to why I say what I'm saying, which is if one believes something exists, like there's this, for instance, oddly enough, I think some on the right believe there's this structural pathology of cancellation that happens in the mainstream media circles because it's all left wing. They put it this way: I know some folks who are uber right wing who actually believe in structural forces more than they think they do. Because they believe there's this structural force, this liberal hegemony that controls the media, that cancels everyone who doesn't have the right perspective, so to speak. And because they believe that, whatever issue happens, no matter how nuanced it is, I think sometimes people see that issue through the prism of, oh, this is another person being cancelled. Because take Piers Morgan, and maybe it's not the best example. I get your point that he was given an ultimatum, and we're only told what he relayed to us. That's another thing to be aware of. We don't know all the moving parts of the story. But ultimately, irrespective of the ultimatum he was given, he chose to walk away from the show. So to say that's kind of part of the pathology or the kind of, the reoccurring theme, leitmotif we see in the mainstream media, people being cancelled, well, it's not really though, is it?
Oh, it is. That's exactly what cancelled is. I think you're mischaracterizing what
sorry about that.
Because no, it's fine, because it's not structural. To be cancelled means you're shutting down the debate and or someone is losing their job. It's not a case of there's this system set out against us to put us down. I've never heard anyone talk like that. When I'm against culture, I'm talking about people losing their livelihoods and or their opinion being shut down because it's not the approved one. It's not the one that people want to hear. And in this instance, he chose to walk away. Doesn't mean he wasn't cancelled. Of course, it's not down to whether someone chooses to leave their job or not. It's a case of, is their voice being shut down? And his voice was literally shut down in that he said it, he voiced his opinion and he was told he had to retract that or leave, and he chose to leave rather than retract his opinion. So that's to me what cancelling is. And that probably, so your explanation helps, because it probably, when I talk about cancel culture online, the people on the left who will jump into my feed will say, but XYZ wasn't cancelled, or cancel culture isn't a thing, and they probably perceive it in the way that you characterized it, which is not the way I perceive it.
Yeah, but to dwell on it more, because I want to understand exactly what you're saying and what you think cancel culture is and what shutdown it means as well. Because in the Piers Morgan piece, Good Morning Britain has sponsors. In fact, it so happens that one of their big sponsors, as you know or may know, was a mental health charity. He said he didn't believe in Meghan Markle's. He said I didn't believe a word of it, is what he said, which I think folks may have said, oh, that means mental health. I imagine as these things go, the producer or whatever EP comes and says, listen, no, our sponsor is thing. You can't say that. He goes back out after he apologizes. He says, that's not what I meant. He backtracked, right? And then eventually he quits. He says something, and because it's a show, audiences react and they complain. They go, we don't want this, right? ultimately, the people who run the show, who have a profit motive, tell him that, hey, mate, what you're saying is cool. Look, we're having the most numbers of Ofcom complaints until Prince Philip dies. We're having the most amount of Ofcom complaints. We got to rectify this. He then ends up going, you know what? I'm not apologizing. I'm leaving. That sounds like capitalism working to me, more than I would say cancel culture or someone being canceled. I mean, it's capital. It's a private company. He chooses to withdraw his labor to go sell it somewhere else. It's capitalism. There's nothing to see here, is what I would say to that. But some would spin it into the narrative of, here's another right-wing or controversial polemic figure being cancelled by the really loud left and the vocal minority. But if you observe the story on its nuances, I don't think you could say that. So when you say shut down, I'm really curious as to what you mean by he was shut down.
And his stance was quite clear that he didn't believe a word that Meghan Markle was saying. Neither do I. And I've pointed out on Twitter and other networks how she lied or actual proven mistruths that she told. So I think it's a fair statement to make. He did go down the line that I wouldn't have touched about her mental health, because that's so subjective. But I don't know whether he was told to apologize because of a sponsor or not. I don't know the ins and outs of the case in that way. What I do know, he's managed to find 17 instances where she's lied or not told the truth in that documentary. Therefore, he was right to call her out on it. But to suggest that it's capitalism at play, I mean, that to me feels a bit it feels a bit sketchy, because it's a man who is known for having controversial opinions. He put one forward, it wasn't accepted. They asked him to remove it, and he declined, and therefore he's had to go elsewhere. That's, to me, that is just the epitome of cancellation.
Okay, fair enough. We might just see different on it, but it's important to note that it's a private company. He says something, and the people who own the company, essentially, I think I heard that Meghan Markle put a call in to the CEO or something like that of ITV. I don't quite remember the facts. And then she they ask him to apologize. We don't know the story, but it strikes me as quite different to a situation where, say, a right-wing professor, who's been teaching something for years, suddenly has a group of people go to the board and go, a small group of people go to the board and say, we don't like what he's teaching, and he loses his job. And that strikes me as quite different from a man who speaks on multiple platforms, deciding not to no longer use one. It just strikes me as slightly different.
It is very different, yeah. If it's a professor who's lost his tenure because of a vocal minority, of course that's more severe. But cancellation doesn't mean you no longer have a voice at all. Like you can get cancelled from one publication, or you can get shut down from one outlet. But the thing that I worry about from what you just said is that it was a private company, because that's the thing I heard the most from the left. It's a private company. They can do what they like. It's a private company. They don't have to let you speak. And that is the most concerning, because when we look at what happened over Twitter, when they had that mass exodus, when they shut down so many voices from the right, including the sitting president of the United States of America, that is concerning, because people's response was, well, it's a private company. Go make your own platform. Well, first of all, yes, it's a private company, but they also have a monopoly over information. They're bigger than mainstream media at this point. This is how we get our information, through social media, through Facebook and Twitter. So when Facebook and Twitter shut someone down, they are censoring, and they are literally cancelling to the extremities. So for Facebook and Twitter to shut down the sitting president of the United States is a power grab. They are saying they have more power, they have more control over our society than the president of the United States. That's concerning in that respect. But then to suggest it's a private company, they can do what they like, go make your own, which is what usually follows, is worrying, because people tried that. Parler was set up. Parler was supposed to be a social media network for freedom of expression. It was banned from the Apple App Store. It's banned from the Google Play Store. Amazon took them down off their servers. So it's not a case of just go make your own, because at this point, it doesn't matter if you're a private company or not. They still have a lot of power, especially if it's in big tech. So it's never an argument that I'm accepting.
Yeah, no, see, I totally agree with you on that. There we agree on the idea of big tech and the fact that, Twitter, for the most part, and I guess the big four have a lot more power. And I guess this is one of the kind of the great things that, or one of the great achievements I think of some of these tech companies is they've managed to still convince us some that they are these kind of small benevolent tech companies just trying to bring the world closer. And you go, that may be part of it, but they are now at such a size that it's literally the marketplace. It's no longer a cute little eccentric thing on the side. It is the marketplace. It's impossible to do political discourse without some of these apps these days, especially in an increasingly digital world. So I get that. And I think we ought to treat some of these companies like commodities, because that's what they are at this stage of human development. So I get that, totally get that. One other thing I think you're right on, especially on, and I mean right in that, you know, right wing and right in terms of correct, is about
the same thing. Don't worry.
Yes, I know, but with the BBC, I think you're right on one thing, which is that the BBC needs to change. I agree with you on that. I agree. The BBC must change. It's big. It does a lot of different things. It does amazing things abroad, quite frankly. But you know, what it's meant to be and what it is, I think it's another thing where there's a bit of a discrepancy there. Now, your solution, and what I've seen you speak about, write about, is defining the BBC. Similar to people who say defund the police. Just, you know, you're both at the same march. You're the bottom of your placard just says BBC and they say police. You know, so you're.
One of them is a public service that protects our very being.
They're both public services.
The other is a broadcaster. I don't think
they're both public services.
That is true. They're both public services, but one protects you and one is broadcasting.
Well, one also protects and champions the views of minorities, voices that oftentimes aren't heard in the mainstream. I mean, this is the purpose and point of the BBC, or was meant to be, was to champion these diverse regions of the country.
That was the point of Channel 4. The point of the BBC was to inform, educate, and entertain.
Yeah,
Channel 4 was
that's the short version. If you read the fuller version, it speaks about reflecting many communities, promoting awareness of different cultures, viewpoints. I mean, it's in their charter, so that's all part of it too.
It's the point of social cohesion, though, not overcorrection.
Yeah, of course, but again, overcorrection, right? And social cohesion, as you put it. I would be curious as to what you think the difference is between both of them. So when for you is the BBC kind of promoting social cohesion, and we're getting this, you know, especially when it comes to minority voices, and to what degree do you go, oh, too far, now it's social correction? I would love to hear your thoughts.
Well, it doesn't do promote minority voices because there's no diversity of thought and opinion on the BBC. Everything on there is of one political persuasion. And I'm not saying it's particularly left-wing, because left-wing people think it's right-wing and right-wing people think it's left-wing, but the BBC has its own political agenda, which is very SJW. It's very, I don't like using the word woke too much, but that's what it is. You know, it's appealing to the metropolitan liberal.
What shows do you watch though? What is it, Lauren Kuhnsberg? Like where's the woke?
It's in everything.
I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm just saying like, is it BBC News? Is it BBC Breakfast? You think
it's in everything? So the last time I was on Newsnight, it was entirely from one political perspective, pushing like the Dr. Sewell report we were on to talk about, and the way they introduce and the wonderful report. He's fantastic. The way they introduce the segment is clearly showing the bias. But even I used to watch Doctor Who. I used to love it. And now every episode is a woke lecture on how more inclusive we need to be and how bad we are. It's like, for goodness sake, come on. This is an alien that's on our planet. It's a fictional piece.
I haven't seen Doctor Who for a while, since David Tennant. But so that's a personal preference of mine. But are you really telling me that Doctor Who now is about how better we need to be? And
every episode is some social justice warrior nonsense being shoved down your throat, and it's boring. It's not even that it's difficult to comprehend or that it's just something I disagree with. It's just boring because it's constant.
I struggle to have a rebuttal to that because I haven't seen Doctor Who.
They overrepresent as well. So on the BBC, right? So this country has what? In our population, about 14.8% of people are of ethnic minority status, right? On the BBC, 23% of their on-screen talent is of ethnic minority status. So they're almost doubling the numbers in order to look extra progressive. It's not representative, it's of real life. So things like EastEnders and all these shows that they shouldn't be doing in the first place because they're not set up to compete with commercial outlets. They're supposed to do.
Well, there was a time where EastEnders was garnering in the was garnering 40 million views or 30-something million views. I actually heard that.
But it's not about the views. That's the point. BBC shouldn't be competing with ITV's Coronation Street because that's what a commercial outlet's doing. BBC should be doing unique stuff that a commercial outlet cannot do because they don't have to focus on ad revenue through the amount of views that they get. That's the problem with the BBC. They don't need a Voice or whatever. They don't need all this reality TV nonsense to compete with these stations because they've got the audience and they've got the funding already. But
so I get your point, but I don't know if that fixes the problem that you've articulated before. Because take The Voice, for instance. The BBC creates that show, it's lovely, and then what channels normally do? They just sell the rights, and so it actually helps them become more financially sustainable because they sell it to America, they sell it to Australia, they sell it to Nigeria, and that's what the BBC does really well, is create really interesting things and then export it around the world. No,
that's not a really interesting thing. They used to have.
You said The Voice isn't really interesting. I mean, all the people paying for it across the world would disagree with you. It's in 11 countries now.
Adopt that model. Use that business model. Then, if you want to create, what you want to do is create commercial stuff and sell it around the world, do that. Become that business, because that's not what the BBC is supposed to be. It's a public broadcaster for the United Kingdom. It's supposed to inform and educate in ways that other outlets cannot do. And any other outlet could do The Voice easily. What they can't do is John Betjeman on churches. They can't do these interesting documentaries that cost a lot but don't necessarily get the same amount of ad revenue or ad interest because they don't get the same number of views.
So, Calvin, you're the new Director General. You've just been sworn in. I don't know if you're sworn. I don't know how it works. Maybe they give you you're knighted now. What would you start doing? Would you just say, everyone, half of you get out? Where it's 50%. What would you do? How would you change things?
Well, I think so many ways. So
I can see you reveling in this. You're like, well.
Well, first of all, they tried to diversify by moving up to Manchester, but they took the metropolitan liberal elite from London up with them. So first of all, I say, look, if we're opening any new stations or any new offices, we're going to hire and recruit local talent first and foremost. That's the key for getting true diversity. Secondly, we want diversity of thought and opinion in the BBC. So we don't want to. If we have to stick with these blooming checkboxes of what ethnicity you are, what religion you are, what sexuality you are, then I want to put what political stance you are too, or get rid of that whole diversity checkbox entirely. And we want to recruit people that are working class and not just from the same 4 universities. We want to recruit people that have different opinions so they can actually spice things up around here. And we don't want this groupthink mentality. It's not directed top down. It's not a case of the Director General saying, okay, we need all our programs to be this woke in this way. It's more a case of that everyone there seems to generally think the same way and think that what they're doing is morally superior and right, therefore it's okay. So we need to shake that up. There might have to be some redundancies to make some room, because of course the BBC is over bloated, where Sky or ITV would have a crew of 5. The BBC has a crew of 14 for the same kinds of things. They waste money left, right, and centre. It's our money at the end of the day. It's public money that they're wasting. So I'd cut down on the amount of people that they have working on things, and maybe cut down a bit more so we can introduce fresh people from a different pool.
And the most important diversity for you is people who are left wing, right wing, and in the center. That's the diversity.
Not necessarily but thinking different. Diversity of thought and opinion is true diversity. If people say that diversity is people looking differently, I say that's wrong, because all they ever want is brown people that think the same as they do, and that's not diversity in my opinion.
Okay, I got you. That's interesting. I want it to be said, I like the BBC, folks. I'm actually enjoying some shows right now. So Calvin's view does not represent mine, but it's.
What are you watching?
Right. What did I last watch on the BBC? Actually, I started what's it called? Noughts and Crosses.
Oh,
I have. Are
you just trolling me now? Are you? I can't tell if you're serious.
No, I'll tell you what. I started it. And I think, listen, look, I've started a PhD in philosophy. I'm interested in philosophy. So as an idea, it's really interesting. However, I think execution, leaves me, left. There's, what's the phrase? Something to be desired. But I do think it's really interesting. I think it's brave. I like Marilee Blackman. I like her. What'd you say?
No pun intended.
So I'm watching that, and I really do hope they have another go at it, maybe later in the future, because yeah, it was a bit haphazard for me, but I like that. Like you, I love the documentaries as well. When Channel 4 whatever does, there was one documentary I watched. I was falling asleep in bed, and it was like it was about the church. It was about Paul or something, and like his journey, like spreading Christianity to different parts of the world. And I remember watching, thinking, "This is brilliant. This is so good. It was so interesting." I fell asleep, of course. Then I did that thing when you wake up, you're like, "What was that show?" I couldn't remember. So interesting to me that that's how you change the BBC. Here's one thing I want to ask you in closing, if you like, because this has been very fascinating. And that is one of the biggest issues with the age we live in is that it's hard for people to know who you are by virtue of sound bites and the 1 minute from talk radio or 5 minutes here and there. So what I would ask you is, what do people think about you, or what's the one thing you'd like to correct? If you could, if people, what's out there that you go, that's not even true, folks. Because listen, I am not that public. I'm a private citizen. But even I have things that I see online and I go, that's not, no. So what would you correct if you could correct things out there right now?
Oh, gosh.
Where do I begin?
So one of the things I hear most often is Calvin is a self-hater, or he hates his black half, or he's how do they word it? I don't know, but it's to that effect anyway, which really, really frustrates me. Because first of all, I don't hate myself. Secondly, I don't hate any half of me. But I don't consider my mixed raceness to be a collection of two different personalities either. I find that whole concept very strange. Like I'm British, but my cultural heritage is half British, half Jamaican, and my ethnicity is half black and half white, and they're not the same thing. So just because I'm not white and I'm not black doesn't mean I have to act what they would call white or act black, because I break down that even because I don't think there is a black way to act or a white way to act. My culture, my personal heritage is made up of lots of different elements. I like curry goat, but I also like shepherd's pie. I would stand up for God Save the Queen, but I would support Usain Bolt. Like, do you know what I'm trying to get at here? Like, there is no definitive black person, a definitive white person. I absorb many different elements from all different, not just the cultures that I'm related to, but different cultures around me. I love a curry, and I like a spag bowl too. And I'm talking about food for no reason, but the point is, people think I need to act
Are you hungry, Calvin?
People think I need to act a certain way or talk a certain way, will have certain views because of the way I look, and I find that most offensive. And I act the way I do because this is who I am, and I talk the way I do because of where I grew up. And I just think that we kind of put these characteristics on pigmentation for no reason. There is no black culture. There is no black community in this country. There may be black communities, but to say there is a black community and a black way to act is patronizing and incorrect. I know, my family my dad's side of the family are from Jamaica, at least. Yeah. And I know that they don't always get on with people from Nigeria and the other way around. So to suggest that all black people think alike and black people are part of one community, I find abhorrent and kind of just dismissive, trying to put us all into one box again to control us.
Here.
I hope that made sense. I think that was a bit of a ramble.
Here. I totally agree with you. I think on that, I would sign that declaration. I would sign that whatever, because it's a big problem, and I can't imagine how it must feel, because yes, it's politics, but it's your life, right? It's people's life, and so when from social media, folks kind of hear a soundbite, whatever it is, and then say stuff, and I think people don't really realize how much stuff that they say weighs, because it's just digital, so to speak. So to take someone and how they look and go, because they look this way, they must have this belief. That is problematic on every single front, and I do wish, that's the one thing I wish would come back as we navigate this increasingly digital world, is for people to realize that you cannot guess what I think by virtue of how I look. And I love something that Chris Williamson said when we last spoke, when he said, we're all really messy, and perhaps this is me projecting because my brain's literally, if you step into my brain, you'd be like, what's going on? And you'd run out, right? All sorts of random ideas bouncing around in there. But I think most people are like that when I talk to people. They and I think, and I love how he said it. He said, like, your belief about, abortion should only be slightly connected to how you think global markets ought to work. But if somehow you've kind of drawn a neat line through all your beliefs such that they're all coherent and everything is just, then you're probably not thinking freely anymore. You're now parroting something. And I think we need to do away with that. I really look forward to the day where I don't see a logo and a face, and I know exactly what's going to happen on that show. I'm looking forward to those days where people surprise me, where people know what Jordan Peterson said once that was so interesting. He said, oddly enough, he was insulted. It was in the GQ interview when he was kind of, he was insulted the interview, and he says like you're not saying anything interesting. he's like when you start speaking, I know what you're going to say. And so and that's what makes conversations interesting, is when you're talking to someone, you don't quite know where they're going to land. And so it makes all their utterances genuinely interesting, because you go, what's he going to say? What's he thinking? Rather than, the pre-packaged line that the right wing say and the pre-packaged line that the left wing say. So that's my kind of rebuttal rant. But ultimately, I'm agreeing with you, because I think that's an important thing to correct out there. And I just wish, things would change. Right. So here's the last question for you. When are you going to run for office?
I'm not. I've been there. I've done that. It was great fun. I've stood in council elections. I very nearly stood in a parliamentary election. I was the Brexit candidate for Broxtowe against Anna Soubry, and stood down so that I didn't split the Conservative vote. I have no interest in running for office. I much prefer advising people from the outside. I talk to Reclaim, I talk to Conservatives, I support people where I can. I would happily talk to Labour if they want to get my opinion on these issues, but they very rarely do, because they have an ideology that they must follow. But, I prefer it from the outside.
Okay.
Free.
Come again?
Then you're free. When you're in a party, you've got to play the party line, and that's very challenging for someone like me that has thoughts and opinions of their own.
Okay. Okay. Here's a supplementary then. Do you have no interest right now, or you don't think you're?
Are you asking me to predict what future Calvin's going to want to do?
Yeah, because and no, I'm not saying you're going to run, but I'm saying, is it like kind of right now I don't feel like having curry goat, but
I do feel like having curry goat.
I do foresee a world where I feel like having curry goat. Do you see what I'm talking about there? Look,
if Donald Trump says, "Look, Calvin, we'll sort your citizenship out. I want you to be my vice president," I would consider it. Okay?
That's a good one. Yeah. Okay. Well,
did you see Candace Owens wants to run as his VP? That would be spectacular.
It's not real, surely. Although we live in such a crazy world that could be real. I did. It sounded like a joke to me.
I would go out and campaign for them. That would be fantastic.
You're joking. You campaign for Candace Owens.
Are you hating?
I don't hate anybody, but Candace Owens.
Oh, that would be so good. Yeah.
What are her policy prescriptions?
She hasn't put a policy together yet, but she's spoken out against this homogeny of.
Oh, and that's easy though. But don't you think that's easy?
No, it's not easy. It's the hardest thing.
No, it's easy, and I'll tell you why I think it's easy. I've been watching her show very closely because I actually find it pretty interesting. And for me, when I watch the show, I just go, "How many shows can they do where they just talk about wokeism?" Because here's what I find so interesting: conservatism as an idea is genuinely interesting and compelling if you articulate it well. But what I find within the kind of right-wing media, generally speaking, and for different reasons, is rather than articulating what a conservative vision of the country or the world, they just talk about wokeism. So all the stories are from the left. It's just the left. It's Hollywood.
There's a reason for that. conservatism is difficult to define because it's intangible by nature. It's not a thing you can put into a box because it's different for every generation. Like I said earlier, it's about protecting the past in order to give it to the future, but also it's a love of place and time, and you can't put labels on those kinds of things.
So it's good vibes. Is that what you're saying? It's just good vibes.
No, well, okay. If you want to make it redundant like that, but I just think wokeism is so easy to define, and lots of conservatism is reactionary to wokeism because it's taking our society to a place where we don't want it to go.
I really do wish we would see more of that, and I think that's really a good place a good lasting note to put there is, for right-wing speakers and right-wing commentators. I think if folks would focus on persuasion and making their arguments beautiful and genuinely compelling, and not just kind of the kind of tested and tried identitarian conversations, I really think you could see a resurgence, in young people going, what is this idea? Let me explore it, rather than being like, I've got to put a black fist on my bio because that's the cultural time we're in. We just got to do that. I'm not saying that's bad, but I think we need to kind of expand the discussion a little bit. It gets to that stage where it's a bit kind of meh. But anyways, Calvin, this was great. I really hope folks listening to this go, he's made me think. And I hope we keep on thinking, because it's the last thing we've got. It's the final frontier.
Yeah, and they're trying to take it away from us, Mike. Don't let them.
The man. I'm going to stick it to the man. Hold on. But who has the largest majority we've seen in the last? Oh, it's the Conservatives. Interesting.
You're assuming that power is in Parliament. That's interesting.
No, I don't think it is. But I just think it's interesting when folks complain about the man, and you go, well, maybe tech. You could argue about tech having there been a liberal elite in San Fran, but you can't say this country is being run by left wingers. They have no power right now.
Yeah, they run our institutions, they run our education system, they run our mainstream media. You can argue with that. You can make
on education. I know that's your area of interest. And Dr. Tony Sewell, you back that report. You love that report. You think it's great?
I'm on an event tonight actually, talking about that report with Don't Divide Us. But I don't know when this comes out, so maybe that won't work. Well,
this will be interesting. Yeah, this won't be out tonight, so it'll be a lot of editing. But I'll tell you what, because we don't have the time, and I, I've had you've been more than gracious of your time. Perhaps another time, I would love to get into education and that report, because I've had lots of interaction with that report. I've read it myself, but I've also been part of groups talking about it, trying to see how those recommendations get turned into action. And so I would love to talk about that report, because I think we're definitely on different sides. But for me, it's interesting how we actually advance. And you may not like this, but the black agenda, or how we make life better for black people in the UK. And you might go, it doesn't matter, Mike. That cohort is better. Don't use black.
Make life better for everybody, not just black people. I don't like this focus on pigmentation.
Well, the report was about structural racism. It was about
it wasn't about structural racism. It was about racial disparities. Big difference.
Racial disparities, which
are not down to structural racism, which is what the report found. But let's have another podcast on this.
They're not down to structural racism only.
Absolutely.
And they're not down to structural racism based on where they looked. Doesn't mean we looked everywhere and we couldn't find it.
No, of course, no. But racial disparities are not irrefutable proof of racism. That's the keynote.
Everyone knows that. Everyone.
No, they don't. I wish people did. I wish people would believe that more.
Anyways, let's stop here. Thanks so much for being a part of this, and I hope this is a nice comma. And later on, perhaps we'll get into more interesting topics. It's been really great talking. Thanks so much for your time, Calvin.
Not at all. It's been